Thank you, Chair. We are now live.
Good evening and welcome to this virtual Cabinet meeting that is being conducted with members and officers at various locations, communicating via audio, video and online. There is also the opportunity for the public and press to listen and watch proceedings. We look forward to the day when we can welcome you to watch in person again, but plan to continue to make our proceedings available in this way in future. Thank you for watching. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee member and scrutiny manager to explain how proceedings will work and confirm that members and officers are present.
Thank you, Chair. First we'll do a roll call. So if you can answer your names when I call them. Councillor Albert.
Yes.
Councillor Billing, Judy.
Just about.
Councillor Clark.
I'm here.
Councillor Hoskins.
Present.
Councillor Jarvis.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Steers Hanscom.
Present.
Councillor Dennis Harburg, you've just arrived.
Yes, thank you, Hilary.
You're welcome. We've also got Deputy Executive Member Ian Mantle. I think. Okay, I'll skip that. Officers, we've got Anthony Roche.
Yep, present.
Ian Fullstone.
Present. Good evening.
Jeanette Thompson.
Present, sorry.
Thank you. Ian Cooper.
Present.
Steve Crowley.
Yes, present.
Nigel Smith.
Present.
Helen Leach.
Present.
Chloe Gray.
Present.
William Edwards on IT and myself, Hilary Deneen. And I do apologise, we've also got David Levitt, Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Good evening.
Thank you very much. I don't believe I've missed anyone. Thank you. Extracts from the remote and partly remote meetings protocol are included with the agenda, and the full version is available on the Council's website, which includes information regarding live streaming, noise interference, rules of debate, and voting. Members are requested to ensure that they are familiar with the protocol. Can I remind members that due to a software update by Zoom, our usual voting procedure will no longer work as required. For the purposes of this meeting, we will be asking you to vote using the raise hand button, which may be found either in participants or in reaction section. For each vote, I will ask those of you voting for a motion to use the raise hand function. Once counted, the votes will be cleared, and I will ask you to, those wishing to vote against, to raise their hands, and we will continue that with abstain as well. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? No, in that case, I'll hand over to the Chair, Councillor Martin Steers Hanscom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary. Item 2 is apologies for absence. We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Gary Grindle, also from Deputy Executive Member Ruth Brown, and also from the Chair of the Fire Committee, Kate Aspinwall. Are there any other apologies?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Councillor Prendergast and Councillor Carol Stanier also send their apologies.
Thank you very much. We then go on to item 3. I would like to propose that we take as read and approve as a true record the minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 15th of December 2020. Can I have a seconder?
Happy to second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. Are there any comments? If not, can we move to the vote as indicated? If you'd like to use the raise hand first of all.
If you could raise your hands to approve the minutes, please.
That I think is unanimous.
Yes,
so that
it is. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, wrong sort of hand. Yeah.
Yeah, all amounted to the same thing.
Sorry.
I then authorise the committee member and scrutiny manager to apply my electronic signature and initials to the approved minutes. Item 4 is notification of other business. There is none. Item 5, my announcements. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on mod.gov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Members are reminded that this council has declared a climate emergency. This is a serious decision and means that as this is an emergency, all of us, officers and members, have that in mind as we carry out our various roles and tasks for the benefit of our district. More details are included on the agenda front sheet, and I look forward, I think, to our next Cabinet meeting where we'll bring together all the things that we are working on and have achieved for this year and look forward to a new strategy going forward. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. And then finally, I will be taking items 13 and 14 following item 10. Item 6 is public participation. There is none. Item 7, referrals from other committees. The referral from Finance, Audit and Risk, item 7A, will be considered with item 11. Another referral from Finance, Audit and Risk, 7B, will be taken with item 12. And finally, item 7C, referral from Overview and Scrutiny Committee, will be considered with item 13. So we then move on to item 8, strategic planning matters. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members have the report in front of them. It covers our local plan. When I last spoke to Mr. Smith this morning, we had heard nothing from the inspector, so still awaiting following the updates we had. I see he's put his picture up there. He's not about to say something that we think. Okay, the next hearings are on the 1st and 2nd of February to cover BK3 site, which is in Barkway, and the master planning process. And we will then be pushing for an answer. That is our local plan. Other local plans, on our local plan, we have been questioned by one of the local MPs about the housing numbers because he was called into the housing department. We have pointed out, and I have authorised the letter today to go to him explaining the situation that is causing the delay in the plan. Was one of the reasons we are, behind in our housing provision. So that's there. Other areas are doing their plans, Welling and Hatfield, Central Beds, St Albans. I do have a meeting, as it says in 8.2, with St Albans, with the my counterparts to discuss duty to cooperate. Neighbourhood plans we're dealing with in the next item with Baldock, Bygrave and Clothall. London Luton Airport. There is an ongoing discussion about the expansion of Luton Airport and the expansion from 18 million passengers to 19 million passengers, and the noise contours where they're moving the holding pattern further north, which actually gives some relief to ours. If anybody wants the technical difference between an A320 and an A320A aircraft and noise contours, I will take that offline because it could get somewhat technical. That's the polite version because we're being recorded. The government announcement on the white paper for planning, we are being told is during spring. We will await that and respond and update you at that time. Don't think there's any further matters. Parking comes under my portfolio. There's not a lot of parking down in the towns at the moment. We are down on income from that, as I'm sure will be reported by Councillor Albert. But any questions?
Okay, any questions anyone wants to raise? Okay, if there are no questions,
Can I ask you to note the report?
yeah, so I take it that I don't think we need to go to a vote on that. Any If there's no other questions, I'll take the report as noted. So thank you very much, Paul. We then move on to the,
Sorry,
Um,
Mr. Chairman, can I just check that Mr. Smith doesn't want to add anything to, or Mr. Falstone doesn't want to add anything to what I've said, just in case?
I was looking out for hands. I think that's a negative.
Yep, okay, thank you.
For me.
Okay, so that item is noted. We then move on to item 9, which is the Baldock, Bygrave and Clothall Neighbourhood Plan. Councillor Clark again.
Yes. Yeah, I am off mute this time. That's good. This is outlining the steps we need to take to move this thing forward. I will do my best to field the questions regarding this parish area and neighbourhood plan.
Thank you very much. First of all, let's take any questions anyone has. It's a pretty clear report, I think. If there are no questions, we'll move to the recommendations. I take it, Paul, you're moving the recommendations.
Yes, that's correct.
I will second that. So can we move to the vote?
If you'd like to raise your blue hand if you're in favour of the recommendations, please.
Thanks very much,
That's
Hilary.
the
That is
GP.
unanimously carried. Thank you, everyone. We're now moving on to item 10, the Conservation Area Summary Report and next steps. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have the benefit of the Principal Landscape Officer with us, who has done the work on this report. It was a report that has come to us previously. This is just adding the steps and the things in. So if there is any questions, the officer will be delighted and should tell me off later for that, to answer any questions.
Thank you. I think this is an excellent report with a great deal of detail, and also we now have the steps going forward, as you say. So I think we need to thank our officers and particularly Helen and her team for the excellent work on it. So Helen, do you want to add anything at this stage?
No, not unless.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, we have the recommendations. 2.1, 2.2, sorry, have I got that right? Am I looking at the wrong one?
2.1 and 2.2.
Just 2.1 and 2.2.
2.2, yeah.
Thought I'd clicked onto the right report. Yeah.
Yeah, agenda item 10.
Yeah, so that's right. The endorsing the findings and also the way forward as in table 1. So if you're moving that, Paul, I will again second. We can move to the vote.
I would like to vote in the normal way, please, if you're voting for acceptance. That's carried, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, that's carried. Back to my notes. Now we're moving to, as I indicated earlier, out of order, to the proposed amendments to performance management at item 13. And this is me to introduce the item. It's a very important part of the work of overview and scrutiny is the considering of performance indicators, and this report and recommendations deals with 2, as you will see in 8.1. As a result of COVID, the target we had originally set for the number of visits to leisure facilities is clearly completely out now. And there is a proposed target there, assuming that the leisure facilities reopen in March. If not, then there is an additional target in the comments column. The second one relates to a percentage of environmental health programmed inspections. Obviously, our environmental health team have been fully occupied with the work on COVID, and therefore we will just treating that PI as for in information only. Okay, we are taking the reference from overview and scrutiny at the same time. So can I invite Councillor Levitt to make his reference from overview and scrutiny?
Good evening and thank you. Yes, we discussed these recommendations at overview and scrutiny last week before. The visits to leisure centres, obviously because of the lockdowns, second lockdown we've had at the leisure centre now, and looks to be fairly ongoing. Obviously the targets there are totally unpredictable, so the proposed to reduce the target to 205,440, assuming it reopens at the end of March. If it doesn't, that figure will be revisited again. And obviously, any future figures are going to depend on whatever recovery programme we need to put in place with the leisure centre. Likewise with the environmental health programmes, obviously with social distancing, staff not having a vaccine yet, etc., it's totally impractical and unsafe for them to visit it most of the time. So we can understand why that figure has been postponed and just be a reporting only. The second recommendation is something that we discussed at the overview and scrutiny before last, and we brought through formally this time. In one of the things we had, it sort of links to the peer review that we had last year before now, which was more public involvement. And we've seen with the meetings going online that we've actually had quite a lot of YouTube views from members of the public, probably more so than we've ever had members of attending committee meetings, particularly those at planning and council. So overview and scrutiny thought it would be a good additional PI, just as a reporting only, to actually look at the number of people watching those meetings on YouTube, both as they're live and later on, because they can go back and review them later, and see how much impact that's actually having on public engagement. And that's my recommendations, Chairman, from Overview and Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you very much, David. I'd certainly support that, and happy to move both the recommendation from to the Cabinet meeting, and I think we can take out considers and, so it will be that Cabinet formally approves the proposed amendments, and then secondly that Cabinet instigate a reporting only figure of those viewing council meetings on YouTube in order to gauge public engagement with virtual meetings.
Happy to second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Paul. Judy.
Thank you. I'm happy to support that, but do hope that we won't merely be measuring our success in terms of community engagement by the number of people who decide to watch us instead of Netflix of a Tuesday evening on YouTube. I think there's still lots of work we have to do, some of it in the same mode in terms of Zoom meetings and street community engagement, and it's a good measure. And it frustrates me sometimes when I'm on a Zoom meeting here in the council that I can't actually see immediately how many people are watching on the YouTube channel. Not that it would change the way I perform in any way at all if I knew that there were 2 people or 5,000, but it's sometimes just handy to have an idea of who's there, and I wonder if there is any way that we can be kept informed during a meeting quietly of that sort of information. I think it would be really helpful at the time to know, because we're in a bit of a vacuum. I'm in my study in my house, so it feels like a bit of a sealed vacuum, and I have no sense of who's there and how many people and all those sorts of things, and it would help me to know. Thank you.
I think we can take that one away to have a look at, and ask officers to have a look at that one. So thank you. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo what Judy said about it's nice to actually know and have an understanding of who's in the room in reality or digitally, but also for me, some of the past Cabinet panel meetings that we've had, it's been really valuable to have people in the room and to be able to engage directly with members of the public on the floor. During COVID, we've actually lost that. We can see that some people are watching on the YouTube channel, but Steve and I have got no way of interacting with those people in the same way as we had done previously. This is something we've discussed sort of with officers in the past to try and find solutions, especially if we're going to have to keep having online meetings or if we're going to have a blended type meeting going forward. So I think, again, sort of informally, I just wanted to raise that point again as a means of community engagement. If we're going to monitor who's watching, not who's watching us, but how many people are engaging with us on YouTube, let's try and turn that into some sort of meaningful engagement and get back to where we were pre-COVID if we can.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Albert.
For what it's worth, Chair, I've just had a message to say that there are 6 people watching now.
Oh, wow, good. Mind you, that was a bit like the number of people watching cabinet meetings in when we were face to face, but thank you for that.
I'm one of them. I was looking to see how many was on, so I'm one of them.
Well, taking out 5 people are watching now then.
Right, Judy, do you want to come back? Was that a legacy? You're muted, Judy.
Good grief, you'd think I'd have learnt. It was just very briefly to come back to Elizabeth about the issue of cabinet panels, because I think it's true to say that Keith and I, with our cabinet panel, did invite a lot of people to be part of the Zoom at the meetings that we've had so far, right from the beginning. Now, that doesn't give you the extra public thing of people who just suddenly decide they'd like to go along, but we have had a lot of people in the room, in the Zoom room, for our cabinet panels so far, and it's worked really well, and I don't think there's a problem about it. Thank you.
Okay, Steve.
Yeah, I think the recent Environment Cabinet panels have not had such a high attendance as some of the earlier ones, but that may or may not relate to the different format. We did agree on one occasion that it would be possible for people to submit questions at cabinet panels via YouTube, and then there was some technical issue with that. But that seems to me to be something that would be very useful if we can solve problems. They'd obviously have to be typed, and you know, clearly it enables one to manage what one does with them. But if that's something that people can do in cabinet panel meetings, may not be appropriate in other meetings, if people can do it in cabinet panel meetings, it enables us to get closer to the sort of format that we had with people in the room, where we used to invite contributions from people at particular parts of the meeting.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Anthony.
Thank you, Chair. Just a query so that we understand what it is we're monitoring and reporting. Are you looking for the number of live views, or are you looking for the total number of views after a few days? So, for example, the most recent full council meeting has got over 120 views on the YouTube channel. Now, I didn't check at the time, but I would hazard a guess that not all of those are watching it live and may well have watched back afterwards. So just so that we are clear on what it is we're being asked to report, is it live? Is it views after a certain amount of time? I can see Councillor Billing in chat asking for both. Is that the consensus? Just so that we're clear. Thank you.
I was going to clarify that I certainly suggest both, but thank you, Anthony. That's really helpful. I think, yes, we do want live views, but I think we also want to know people who've watched, say, within a week or whatever, or whichever period of time. Okay, so I think there are a couple of legacy hands there. If I'm right, yeah. But thank you, overview and scrutiny. That started a very interesting discussion and very fruitful one, I hope. And also thank you. The discussion at overview and scrutiny was very interesting. Another thing that was raised there was to think about the possibility of opening our outdoor swimming pools early, and that's been fed into our offices to look into that. So thanks very much. We have the 2 recommendations I've read out. So can we move to the vote in the way we've been doing? Thank you very much. That's clearly carried. Thanks, Hilary. Right. So we then move on to item 14, the Hitchin Market new contract. Keith, to introduce.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. This is really to continue the contract which currently exists, which was extended and due to expire at the 31st of March 2021. given the current situation of retail generally, it seems it's the best way now is just to keep rolling this forward until such time as you can take a proper look at it. So the recommendation is to continue with the existing Hitchin Market contracts, certainly for another year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Happy to
So
second
you're
that.
moving the recommendation, Judy?
I will move the recommendation, certainly, yeah.
Judy, you're muted again.
God, I think Paul was trying to second. Were you, Paul? Was somebody?
Yes.
Okay, because I just wanted to say I was hoping that the Service Director Commercial would be here because it's so delightful to see positive negotiations, discussions and outcomes between North Herts Council and the market. He will remember, as I do, that it hasn't always been thus. And it's just a delightful reminder of some ways in which we've moved on in the way we work with our partners over many years. So I would like to fully support the extension of the contract, albeit for practical reasons.
Okay, thank you. I'll take Ian next and then come back to Keith to wind up. Ian Elbert, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Chair. I mean, clearly to support the paper, and I think that's the right decision in the circumstances. I think will be welcomed by residents of Hitchin and across the district. I think it still leaves us with with the questions that there will be both in the slightly sort of medium and longer term as to whether the market needs further investment, and that's certainly something I think I know Keith looking at, and we may well want to return to in the future. Now's not the time, but clearly once we can hopefully get the market back sort of fully open, fully functioning, that's certainly something I hope that we can look at, but clearly support this sort of effectively interim proposal for the course of the next year, and I think that's absolutely the right way forward. So completely support the recommendations in the paper.
Thanks, Ian. Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I did just want to place on record my appreciation for the tremendous work on this done by Chloe Gray, who I know is on the call this evening. She's led this really well. She and Councillor Helen Oliver, who's been the council representative with Hitchin Markets Limited, have done sterling work and turned around this relationship, really, the sort of Cagney and Lacey of cooperation. So yeah, just thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Keith.
Okay, so if
Thank you.
there's no further questions and comments, and yeah, thank you, Chloe. Can we move to the vote? That is carried. So we then move back to item 11, the revenue budget, and you will all have your sheets of papers with the detail of the budget, of course, and Ian Elbert to introduce.
Thanks, Chair. I think colleagues will be pleased to know that I don't intend to go through the spreadsheets line by line. We may be here for a while. Otherwise, I could see Councillor Billing looking relieved. The purpose of the report, but I mean, I did want to spend a little bit of time on this, Chair, because I think it's important really to set out where we are and the way forward. I mean, the purpose of the report is mainly, for you to agree and recommend a budget for full council to consider on the 11th of February. The report also considers the budget position at the end of November, both in the current year and impacts on next year. Responsibility for monitoring the current year position rests with you as Cabinet, so recommendation in front of you, 2.1, is for Cabinet only. Please obviously have a look at the addendum version of the report that was supplied, which provides an update for the leisure position as agreed by the council last week. I don't tend to go through this in detail again tonight, you'll be pleased to hear, but I think it is important though not to let the opportunity to go by without saying that I do believe the council took a difficult but correct decision last week to maintain and continue the leisure services used by thousands of residents across the district once the national restrictions are eased, of course. And as promised, we will report back regularly to FAR, to Cabinet and to full council. I was disappointed though by the opposition to that proposal, not as much in terms of the fact there's opposition, that's to be welcome, that's part of the accountability of the administration. I think that there was no alternative being proposed to the plans in front of us. And indeed, there was a danger that if we chose to close our leisure centres, or indeed, and I think it was welcome the fact that the council did agree that we would maintain our leisure services. But I think the alternative could see the closure of our leisure centres with important things like, for example, where would our children go for swimming lessons? Where indeed would many people with disabilities go for the types of leisure services? And that is really was fundamental to the decision we made last week. And I was welcome that the council endorsed the proposals made by Councillor Jarvis. Now, there is a slight change made to the saving reference, which is E5 on page 23. That's the saving that reflects the independent remuneration panel would only meet every 4 years. Given the decision by council last week, there will be a need for the panel to make a recommendation next year. So the earliest year the saving can be made is from 22-23. Now, a few highlights I would like to pick out from the report. The consultation with the business ratepayers has commenced, with an email having been sent to businesses and business groups such as BIDS and the Chamber of Commerce who've engaged with the process in the past. Paragraph 8.5 details the impact on the tax base from the increase in the council tax reduction scheme caseload that we've talked about or in other papers, and indeed on the CTRS policy last week. Second bullet in 8.8 details the council tax support grant, which is essentially compensation from government for increased levels of the council tax reduction scheme. But given that the impact on funding has already been reflected, it is proposed that this grant is applied to the general fund to offset that impact. Table 1 in paragraph 8.11 shows at the bottom the impact of a £10 Band D equivalent increase in council tax if it were allowed without a referendum. It is unknown when any announcement will be made of the referendum limit. It may be after the council meeting. Recommendations 2.5 and 2.6 in front of you are therefore been written to reflect that unknown. As set out in paragraph 8.4, that £10 would increase the council's funding by around £250,000 per year on an ongoing basis. Now, the failure by government to properly fund local authorities, despite promises made, amounts in many respects to a stealth tax on residents, as local authorities are forced to increase council tax by the maximum available. But if we are to continue to maintain vital local services, I don't see there as an alternative. Paragraph 8.18 refers to the pool application for 21-22. Following some technical advice, it has been decided by all the authorities involved to proceed with the pool. This does come with some risk, but it is considered that the upside reward is more likely than the downside risk. And we are being brave on this council as set out in the peer review from last year. Any downside, of course, is limited by the pool still having a safety net. In table 3 in paragraph 8.20, you'll see that it's recommended to release the special reserve and 2.5 million on the MHCLG reserve into the general fund reserve. This will help to maintain the general fund reserve balance over the next few years. Paragraph 8.22 to 8.24 details the setting of a minimum general fund balance. The Chief Finance Officer, the Service Director for Resources, is required to recommend a balance, and the medium-term budget should be planned on the basis of not going below this amount. The increase in the recommended minimum balance reflects the uncertainty in relation to COVID-19 recovery and also Brexit. Table 5, paragraph 8.26, highlights the key variances from the working budget that are over 25,000 and as identified in November. You'll note the continued trend of falling paper tonnages, leisure service changes we've talked about, and court summons income where we suspended further action after the national lockdown. Paragraphs 8.30 to 8.33 provide a commentary from the Chief Finance Officer about the reliability of estimates. You'll note that these statements are more caveated than usual, which, as you will appreciate, reflects the uncertain times we're facing. Appendix B details the proposed savings and investments that make up the budget. The lines shaded in grey are items that have been considered but have since been removed. The other lines with zero values have been taken forward but have no general fund impact. They're shown to aid transparency. It's worthwhile also mentioning here, colleagues, that the work of the challenge board that we agreed to set up, which has looked at the budgets both for this coming financial year and beginning to look at ideas for future years, will continue to operate, and we'll report back further on its discussions and conclusions. Now, finally, you will have heard, I think, mostly I think we were here for Rosie Waters, the Chief Executive of North Herts Citizens Advice last week at full council. Citizens Advice have provided a business case in relation to some potential additional funding. These are exceptional times, and that does mean I think we need to do sometimes some exceptional things. While the actual number of customers that the CA has not increased, as Rosie said last week, the complexity of cases being handled by CA advisors has done so. And clearly their visit to visit customers or customers visit them has been significantly reduced, if not stopped altogether, over the last year. Currently, we have a 3-year core agreement for £147,000 per annum, which is increased in line with inflation with CA. We also provide funding for a court officer. But what I'm proposing here now, colleagues, which will be difficult to repeat in future years, is that we do fund a further additional 50,000 to the Citizens Advice in the following civic year. And obviously, of course, unless in the future, of course, government comes through with additional resources for council, we certainly cannot promise that for the future. Therefore, it is important that officers enter urgent discussions with CA on their future funding arrangements. So I do hope colleagues and the Cabinet will welcome the proposal that we do fund the CA exceptionally this additional 50,000 in the next financial year. If you agree this proposal, I'll ask the Service Director to update the report and the appendices for full council in February. So finally, Chair, I'll ask the Cabinet to agree recommendation 2.1. I'll ask Cabinet to approve recommending the Council recommendations 2.2 to 2.6. And additionally, I would like to add a recommendation 2.7, which is to ask Cabinet to approve recommending to Council a payment of £50,000 in 21-22 to Citizen Advice in North Herts. I move those recommendations, Chair. Happy to obviously pick up any questions.
Right, thank you, Ian. I've got Judy. Are you seconding, or?
I'm happy to second, unless anybody else has got that job. But I specifically wanted to speak about the £50,000 uplift to the budget for Citizens Advice. And it seems to me that we do need to improve in future years the ways in which we communicate throughout the year and do financial planning with those organisations with which we have a memorandum of understanding. I think of Citizens Advice, I think of CVS, and I think of the Ethnic Minority Forum Centre as well. And I think we need to ensure that we have regular fixed planning discussions and meetings in the diary so that nothing comes as a surprise in any sort of way. But I was made particularly conscious during today of the really quite desperate needs of citizens' advice. And it's not their need, it's the need of all our citizens who use their services and depend on them so much. When I put out a small notice saying that I had some small amounts of a locality budget remaining in my budget that I would use or lose at the end of February, and I was immediately contacted by Citizens Advice saying, would I possibly consider helping them buy a gazebo for when they're able to travel around the district in order to get closer to the people who need to see them in remote places. So there is no doubt in my mind that they need this funding and that it's up to us to support it and make sure that we have the most robust mechanisms in place to be constantly talking to those organisations with whom we partner and fund during the year.
Thank you, Judy. Steve, I believe you have another point to make.
Yeah,
Steve.
although I do have another point to make, but I'd like to support the proposal to provide some additional funding for business advice in the coming year. I think we heard at council last week the issues that they faced. I think we can well understand the position that they find themselves in, and the very many extra people, or very many more different people with different and more complex cases they can deal with. But the issue I wanted to talk about was the question of the potential £10 rather than £5 increase in council tax, and I think we've clearly no idea whether or not the government will accept that. I think we find ourselves in the position where, for the reasons that Ian Albert has set out, the council needs for the long term to maximise the amount of council tax that's able to collect in order to fund the many things that the government hasn't funded and the reductions in support they're providing. What I think slightly concerns me is that we know that there are some members of our communities that have been very seriously impacted, whereas there are others who will frankly, well, they probably won't welcome paying more council tax, will recognise that now is a time when those who can need to make a larger contribution. So I would like to suggest that if we find ourselves able to make a £10 increase in the council tax, the additional 250k approximately from the second £5 that they're maybe not certainly not guaranteed yet, should for this year only be set aside for a fund to provide support to people who have suffered particularly as a result of the COVID situation. Not something I would envisage going forward. I think we clearly need some thought about the best way in which to apply that, but I think that would enable us to argue that we've done what we can in order to do something to make life easier for those people who've been most seriously affected by the pandemic. And of course, in future years, it would allow the council to increase its council tax based upon that higher figure. So it would have no long-term continuing impact, but would enable us to, I think, behave in a desirable way in truly exceptional circumstances. So I hope that other members of the Cabinet might support a motion along those lines.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. You did give me notice of that, and I'm very happy to second that proposition. I think that's a very appropriate way to deal with this, and obviously, as Ian outlined in introducing the item, the reason that we would want to increase council tax by that amount is because of the way in which the government hasn't fully funded all the things it's asked us to do, or the losses that we are finding, and so using that money, which obviously will have an effect on all our council taxpayers, to help those who really need the help because of what COVID's done, seems absolutely right to me. So thank you for bringing that forward, and I'm happy to second that. Is there any further discussion on? We've effectively got a 2.7 and a 2.8 now on the recommendations to council. Is there any need for any further discussion or any other questions? If not, then thank you very much. That's very efficiently put things forward, following quite a lot of discussion, of course, as we went through the process of coming to the final proposal for the budget. So can we move to the vote? That is unanimously carried. Thank you, colleagues. We then move on to item 12, which is the, oh, sorry, before we move on, I'm remiss in saying that to thank the Fire Committee for its thorough look at the budget before it came here. We appreciated their responses. As I indicated, Councillor Aspinwall wasn't able to join us, but in any case, the committee endorsed the budget going forward. So there was nothing actually extra to contribute at that point. So sorry, item 12, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I was, I think, also remiss in obviously not thanking FAR for their work. And indeed, I think obviously, and I will make this point when we come to the budget meeting, to thank Ian Cooper and all his team for their work in actually both managing, monitoring our budgets, providing, I think, Cabinet and Council with a lot of very detailed information in support of the work that is done here. So you know, we obviously see Ian at meetings and sometimes Antonio, but obviously there's a whole team Ian has got there that are working on some of these budget things. So it's real, and their work is absolutely invaluable and has been rightly praised by our auditors, Ernst & Young and so on, for the promptness and accuracy and so on. So obviously like to thank Ian and all the team for that. On the investment strategy, I mean, I will try and be a bit briefer on this one. The main components of this report are to agree a capital programme for next year and beyond, and to agree how the surplus cash will be invested. The capital programme should reflect the costs that will be incurred in maintaining existing assets, as well as the acquisition and development of new assets. Both of these should reflect the priorities of the Council. The capital programme reflects what was presented at the member budget workshops, except for those changes that are detailed in paragraph 8.4. As in previous years, it's expected that the core capital programme, i.e. those items which support service delivery, can be funded from existing and new capital receipts. However, the investments in the regeneration of the district through commercial and residential property acquisition and development are likely to require borrowing. The impact of this is therefore considered at a summary level, but given the uncertainty over the timing and scale of these investments, they will be fully considered when the need arises. Any investment will be contingent on economic conditions and the opportunities that arise. As detailed in paragraph 8.9, it's necessary to consider how the Council will invest its surplus cash and its appetite for risk. I said it last week at Council that the overall investment rates continue to decline. New investments are providing a maximum yield of around 0.1%. So 8.9, we are proposing some changes in respect of local authorities, building societies and banking groups where we hold money. In addition, whilst the ability to invest in a property fund has been in the strategy for a number of years, this will now be taken forward with the intention of selecting and investing in a fund by the end of April. It's also proposed that the ability to invest in a UK multi-asset fund is also added to the strategy. It will help us diversify. The intention will be to select and invest in a fund early in the new financial year. Finally, the Code of Practice on Treasury Management requires us to submit a report to full Council, setting out the 4 clauses which should be formally passed in order to approve the adoption of the Code. And the detail is set out in paragraphs 8.12 to 8.17. So, Chair, I'd like to ask Cabinet to recommend to Council, that's 2.1, the adoption of the investment strategy at Appendix A, including the capital programme and prudential indicators, and a 2.2, Cabinet recommend to Council adoption of the 4 clauses in relation to the Code of Practice on Treasury Management as set out in paragraphs 8.12 to 8.17. I move.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'll second that from the chair. Any questions, discussion? Clearly set out, and again, thanking Ian Cooper as well and his staff, as you have, Ian. Can we then move to the vote on those two recommendations? That is unanimously carried. Thank you very much. We then move on to our final item of the evening, and that is the council's procurement strategy. Councillor Elbert again.
Sorry, it's me again. And to thank Jeanette Thompson and her team for their work on producing the paper in front of us. Now, I think all of us, here would, I hope, agree that procurement is a really important part of the work this council does. It's something as where we as a council can make a real difference to the local economy. We know that we're spending £22 million per year on commissioning goods, works and services from suppliers. So we're presenting this new procurement strategy as an overarching approach to incorporate some of the good work we've already started to undertake on, for example, safeguarding matters such as modern slavery. We as a council are committed to promoting the living wage. We will value diversity and look for those and where those are being carried out by our suppliers and potential suppliers in the future. But as I said earlier, it's also about other important issues of trying to support the local economy, especially now and post-pandemic. We want to encourage community wealth through more localised procurement. It sets out measures to continue to streamline processes, reduce costs and identify better sources of supply. And clearly, obviously, the devil is in the detail here, colleagues, and so there will be need to be work that sits underneath that to actually embed this strategy into the day-to-day work that this council takes forward. Paragraph 8.2 of the report summarises what we will be focusing on during this year, covering the broad headings of leadership, commercialism, community and social benefit, and reacting to change. And it's decided to take this forward at this time of pandemic, and indeed having just left the EU, whatever your views on that may be, we're opting for a shorter, more reactive one-year strategy from April. But we are very keen to get this established and in place from April of this financial year, this coming financial year, but April 2021. The strategy also seeks to incorporate our wider council priorities, such as climate change, ethical supply, and indeed commercialism. Now, we could delay this strategy, this new strategy, but we are being ambitious and indeed, I think, brave at this stage. In doing this, we recognise that not all of our aims may be realised. Some we're able to put in place from April, others we will need work on locally and indeed ideally nationwide. So where we can change our own documents, we'll be doing this from April. Bigger pieces of work, for example, electronic goods supply, a key spend for the council, we'll be looking to external monitoring bodies such as Electronic Watch to help interrogate ethical issues in the supply chain. And indeed, we should try and see if other Hertfordshire councils wish to join us in this approach. And I think that would be something that would both be very welcomed. We recognise that this is an unprecedented time. Legislation will be changing and we're not certain what future arrangements will be in place post-EU. And that's why I do want to say a word about Go Local. It is the aspiration of the administration to increase that 50,000 threshold, ideally up to as much as 100,000. Currently, there's a consultation green paper from government called Transforming Public Procurement. It's 82 pages long. You can read it if you are feeling you need to go to sleep. But it is an important document. It came out just before Christmas. It closes that consultation on the 10th of March. The Green Paper is positive towards many of our aims, but it did go live before the UK-EU agreement was signed off and indeed any new obligations under that were acquired and required. So hopefully before the end of the year, we can update our contract procurement rules, but this may depend on what legislation or regulation is needed. In the meantime, I want to implement a much more positive push from the council to seek local quotes for up to £50,000. And I think that, which is our current policy, but we do need to make sure we actively, and all the council staff actually actively engage and continue to engage in that. And that's certainly something I think we should challenge ourselves to do. We know that this and the pandemic have had and continue to have a significant impact on our local economy and suppliers. So we'll be looking also to see how best our Brexit project board, which is cross-party and has a residual fund which can be used to assist post-Brexit and encourage local suppliers to do business with the council. We'll also, we of course, have the council's response and recovery board efforts. Again, a cross-party board will also be looking at local recovery measures. And indeed, we also have, as part of the grant we've received from government, as part of the additional restrictions payment, a potential of setting up a further business support fund that we will also be looking at over the coming months. So with all of those things, Chair, I'd like to obviously to put those recommendations that we adopt the strategy and the recommendations in the paper and ask Cabinet to endorse them. Thank you. I move.
Thank you, Ian. I'm happy to second from the chair. I think it's an excellent piece of work, and I'm really proud of what is put in there, and really want to thank Jeanette and Isabel and the colleagues for all the work that went into producing the report. Any questions, any observations people want to make? If not, thank you very much. Let's move to the vote. Oh, that is unanimously carried. And indeed, that brings us to the end of this Cabinet meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance, and we'll conclude the meeting and finish streaming.